said I'm an yeah?
There's blood all over the place. I just got assaulted and jumped. Are you the one that got... No, that was the other victim, but I got really bad and I had blood all over me.
Latham stabbed his 51-year-old neighbor multiple times, ultimately causing his death. Now he's being tried for the crime of manslaughter.
This is Zachary Latham, the 18-year-old who killed his neighbor to become a TikTok star. Some TikTokers, content creators, and influencers are known to do crazy things to enhance their following and engagement. So, was this one of those cases? Did this teen kill someone to increase his followers on TikTok? Or was it an extreme case of a neighbor's feud? Let's find out.
This Zachary Latham was trying to be a TikTok star, that he's filming his neighbors, he's acting up, disrupting the peace, being socially unacceptable, all of it because he wanted to be TikTok famous.
The case of Zachary Latham and William Durham was a shocking and tragic incident that unfolded on May 4th, 2020. This case offers a troubling glimpse into the dark side of social media culture, where the pursuit of online fame can lead to devastating real-world consequences. But let's start from the top, because this incident didn't just unfold over an argument or a random hassle. Zachary Latham and the victim had a bit of a dark history with each other before the unfortunate incident. There's an origin to everything, and this story begins when Latham moved into his grandparents' home in Vinland, New Jersey in 2018 when he was 16 years old. There aren't many details we could find out about Zachary's background or his life before the age of 16. No information was provided about his parents, except that his mother passed away when he was 16, and apparently the teen was emancipated not long after his mother's death. If you haven't heard of the process of emancipation, it's a legal process in which a minor, someone under the age of 18, is granted the legal status of an adult. When a minor is emancipated, they are no longer under the legal control or authority of their parents or guardians. Instead, they are considered legally responsible for their own decisions and actions, just like an adult. There are a variety of reasons for minors to seek emancipation, such as escaping neglective or abusive parents, pursuing early marriages, or making medical-related decisions. Though it's unclear what Latham's reason was, at least his grandparents were willing to help provide a roof over his head. So Latham moved into this new neighborhood and immediately started causing trouble. And one of the people who noticed his troublesome behavior was William T. Durham, a 51-year-old veteran who lived next door to Latham's grandparents. Apparently, Latham had a love for cars and reckless driving. He would drive around the neighborhood in a thoughtless manner, and it wasn't sitting well with his neighbors. William wanted to address the situation, but he didn't approach Latham about it the first time. He went to his grandfather and told him about Latham's reckless driving. And being a traditional guardian, Latham's grandfather wasn't going to let him get away with it. He gave Latham a lecture and told him he needed to stop doing what he had been doing, or else they were going to kick him out. And on top of that, the grandparents forced Latham to go over to the Durham's house to apologize. The teen wasn't happy with this arrangement, but he had no choice. So he unwillingly marched himself over to the neighbor's home and apologized for his reckless driving, promising he wouldn't do it again. But of course he didn't mean it, because right after his apology, Latham went right back to his mindless stunts, cruising around the neighborhood and acting like he's too cool for school. Also, an important thing to note is that Latham had a history of minor charges like simple assault, terroristic threats, and criminal mischief on his juvenile record. Yeah, so this kid was trouble. At this point, William's impression of Latham wasn't too good, and it continued to worsen over the next 2 years. As we mentioned earlier, this entire situation wasn't caused by a single fight or altercation. It's 2 years filled with small conflicts and heated exchanges. Imagine putting up with a reckless teen for 2 years. It would be a nightmare for anyone. We could only assume that Latham's grandparents were exhausted at this point and didn't want to deal with the back and forth situation anymore. So the Durham family and Latham were always at each other's throats. And it didn't help matters that Latham was continuously provoking the family on TikTok. Like many other people obsessed with social media, he was one of those who wished to achieve virtual stardom. He had created many videos and TikTok posts over the years, but none of them managed to capture the attention of a large audience. Interestingly, most of his content was about reckless driving or him posing with fancy cars, which raised the question of how he managed to acquire so many luxurious vehicles. People could argue that he might have a successful job and could afford lavish expenses, except Latham was serving as a National Guard during this time. Apparently, the teen enlisted as soon as he turned 18, which makes his behavior even more unacceptable because as a military personnel, he is supposed to be serving the people, not provoking them for his own enjoyment. In April of 2020, Latham recorded a confrontation between him and Catherine Durham, William's wife, calling her a Karen when she confronted him about his driving again. And for some reason, this video went viral on his TikTok account, attracting more than 3 million views. Maybe it's because of the keyword Karen that got him so many views, because people nowadays are attracted to content that calls out bullies or domineering people online. But that's not all. In the comment section of the post, there were many people who left freakish comments, encouraging Latham to continue messing with Catherine because they thought it would be hilarious to see. And as someone who's been craving the chance to achieve social media fame, Latham was determined to give these people what they wanted. Maybe he thought of himself as an undiscovered actor who got his big break and was destined to seize the spotlight. Whatever it was not going to end well. Latham continued to be a nuisance to the Durhams, driving by their home, shouting and taunting Catherine to get a reaction out of her. He wanted her to come out of the house yelling and screaming so he could post it to his account and get more engagement.
He turns the corner here and the Durham family's outside doing yard work. It was a beautiful day and he yells out the window, hey Karen, we went viral on TikTok.
Can you believe the audacity of this kid? He literally has been annoying the heck out of these people for 2 years, and now he wants to use them to get himself famous. What was going on through his head? Could you get any more desperate for attention? He already had such an arrogant attitude for someone who made no impact in the world yet. Imagine if he was actually famous. What would he do then? At one point, William and Catherine's 21-year-old son got fed up with this kid's harassment and tried to confront him, telling him to get out of the car. In turn, Latham told him that he was armed with a knife. And guess what? The 18-year-old recorded the entire thing and posted it on his TikTok with the title, "Karen's son found the video that went viral and tried taking me out of the car. Blow up for part 3. Clearly, Latham was making this out to be a joke. He wanted to go viral so bad that he was willing to continue tormenting these people. It didn't matter to him that he was being a pain to his neighbors. Nothing mattered except his obsession with getting a viral video. Latham was truly a nightmare of a neighbor to live with. It doesn't mean that he wasn't an evil person or anything, at least not at this point. It just means that he was annoying, attention-seeking, and a self-centered person who didn't care about other people's feelings. Eventually, Latham did gain over 40,000 followers on TikTok. Law enforcement officers were called after the confrontation with the neighbor's son, but they only took statements from both sides and no charges were filed. After so many confrontations and harassment, the Durham family decided to seek legal assistance. They tried to file a complaint against Zachary Latham, but law enforcement officers claimed they couldn't sign the complaint because the courts were closed due to the global pandemic. This conveys that they couldn't get any legal or law enforcement assistance on this matter and had to continue enduring the nonsense. I mean, it's not completely the law enforcement people's fault. The pandemic forced the entire world to go into hibernation. It had an extremely negative impact in the United States and continued to be a problem after the nationwide lockdown. So it's understandable how major cases could be delayed due to the courts being closed. But there could have been a better workaround for this situation because during this time, the dispute between them hadn't evolved into a crime yet. So it was still manageable. And all they needed was for someone to review the complaint and sign off on it. In no way am I suggesting that officials were biased towards the Durham's complaint, but there could have been another way to resolve the situation. For example, local judicial offices and departments could have switched to virtual meetings or hearings for minor charges and complaints in their area. Authorities must understand that crime doesn't stop because there's a global pandemic. I mean, doctors, lawyers, students, even social workers were getting their work done virtually since the beginning of the pandemic, so there was a way to stop things from getting out of control. However, the Durhams were left to sort things out for themselves. It's kind of a depressing situation when a civilian seeks help from local officials but gets turned away. And if you can't reach help from the law, where else can you get it from? There was video evidence on Latham's TikTok where he recorded a uniformed officer saying he won't arrest Latham, even though he's seen the video of the teen's reckless behavior. In the video, you can clearly see that Latham is questioning the officer and telling him to say hi to TikTok in a very joking manner. It's like he was proud to have the law on his side, and maybe he was.
We would arrest you.
But you won't do anything even though you saw video proof, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
For your video, that is correct.
thank you. Say what's up, TikTok.
TikTok?
Yeah, say what's up.
Everything led to that fateful day of May 4th, 2020. On this day, Latham continued his mindless mischief and decided to swerve his car onto the sidewalk, almost hitting another teenager who was driving his bike in the neighborhood. This person happened to be William Durham's 17-year-old son. When William found out about this, he decided to put his foot down. Enough was enough. As a parent, he wasn't going to tolerate some mindless teen almost killing his kid. So he did something that would bring the entire feud to a tragic end. William and his family marched over to the Latham's grandparents' home to confront them. Yes, the entire family was involved in the confrontation, which wasn't a wise decision. You can't cross into someone's home or territory and start to brawl with them. Even though Latham always tried to harass them, he did it from the roadside, which was off their property, so he technically didn't violate them. But when you cross into someone's front yard or driveway, you could be considered a threat to their safety. However, it's not like the Durhams had a choice. Not being able to receive help from the law enforcement, they had to take matters into their own hands. Also, Latham was 18 years old at the time, so there was no need to go to his grandparents anymore. Not like it would make a difference because it's not like the teen would listen to anyone but himself. So William saw Latham approaching from their home and tried to block the teen's car with his truck. Catherine, his wife, tried to record the incident with her phone while they confronted him for almost running over their son with his car. Latham got out of his vehicle and got physical with the family. He threw an elbow at Catherine, pushed her, and knocked her phone out of her hand. Then he returned to his car and sped home. The Durhams followed him to his home, and at this moment, Latham's wife, Sarah Latham, exited from the house to approach the family. Yes, 18-year-old Zachary Latham was married. Sarah walked out of the house holding her phone as she recorded the incident. She reportedly told the family that they better back up because they won't like what's coming out of the house. And what Sarah meant by that was that her husband was getting himself armed inside the house.
The guy he was about to confront went inside the house and retrieved 2 knives and a stun gun.
Clearly, Latham was ready to confront the family with force. Keep in mind that William and his family are unarmed. At this point, they should have removed themselves from the situation because there was no point in arguing with someone who doesn't want to see reason. It's like talking to a brick wall. From the beginning, you could see that they could never reach a mutual solution. It would have been better to go home, hire a lawyer, and sue the living daylights out of this kid. But of course, they didn't want to turn around and leave. They decided to keep approaching Latham. What happened next left everyone completely horrified. Latham fired his stun gun at one of William's sons, and the older man tried to hold him back, but the teen slashed his arm with one of his knives and then retreated to his garage. And as things escalated from there, William went after Latham and a nasty fight broke out. They were wrestling and wrangling each other while Catherine yelled in the background for Latham to drop the knife. Surprisingly, Latham's wife Sarah continued to record this brawl between the two men instead of calling 911 or doing something to help. She just stood there with her phone. Amidst the struggle, William was under the armpit, puncturing one of his lungs. The fatal injury took his life almost immediately. By the time paramedics arrived, William was pronounced dead on the scene. It was later revealed that Latham was the one who called 911. In the released audio of the emergency call, you can hear Latham frantically saying he was attacked by William and sustained many injuries himself.
There's blood all over the place. I just got assaulted and jumped.
Are you the one that got
No, that was the other victim, but I got beat up really bad and I had blood all over me.
It's shocking how Latham didn't mention anything about William, yet he was assaulted and injured as well. It's understandable that he was trying to get help. But there's a man dying on the ground next to him. If a person acted in self-defense and they accidentally gave someone a fatal injury, we would assume they'll say something along the lines of, "Someone assaulted me and I injured them in self-defense. Please send help, they're dying." Or, "I didn't mean to do it, he came at me first, please help." Basically, the necessary human remorse and guilt. Let's assume that Latham did nothing wrong, but as a person who just injured someone in the midsection area would express some kind of conscience-stricken attitude. But all the teen did was tell the dispatcher about himself, and he didn't mention anything about William. It almost sounded like he was trying to maximize his injuries to paint himself as the victim in the case.
Latham stabbed his 51-year-old neighbor multiple times, ultimately causing his death. Now he's being tried for the crime of manslaughter.
When officers arrived at the scene, William had sadly succumbed to his injury. Latham and his wife were sitting in the front of their home with two friends. The teen was taken to the hospital to get treated for a concussion and a few abrasions before he was taken into custody. He was later charged with second-degree manslaughter and aggravated assault, but Latham claimed he only did it in self-defense. He said that the family came at him in a violent way and they were armed with guns and a knife. He thought he was going to die. Therefore, he responded accordingly. However, recorded footage proves that William and his family were unarmed during the confrontation. Remember how his wife, Sarah, was recording from her phone since the moment the Durhams entered their property? Well, brace yourself, because you're probably going to be very upset when you learn the reason why she was documenting the entire brawl. Later, Sarah reportedly said that the reason she was recording was because her husband wanted to post it to his TikTok account, hoping to finally become the star he was destined for. This revelation weakened his claim of self-defense, because if he planned to record himself and the Durhams, it means he wanted to confront them. If he acted in self-defense, he wouldn't have his wife filming the event while he himself gets armed with 2 knives and a stun gun. Catherine and her sons were also charged with a simple assault and trespassing because they did enter someone else's property without permission, looking to create a conflict. To be honest, this horrific event could have been avoided if everyone was a little more neighborly in the beginning. Unfortunately, what's done is done, and there's no going back, so they have to go forward with this homicide case. The Durham family's lawyers, Diane Ruberton and Robert Simmons, believe that Latham had the intention of luring William and his family to his home, attacking them, and documenting it for TikTok, which sounds like a reasonable theory considering how things unfolded and his wife admitting to recording the altercation for her husband's TikTok. I mean, how desperate could you be for a viral TikTok video? Latham did get the fame he wanted, just not in the way he thought he would.
Was fame on TikTok a motive for a killing? A grieving family says the answer is yes after their father was to death. Their 18-year-old neighbor has been charged.
The trial of Zachary Latham was extremely publicized because many people wanted to know the outcome of the case. But first, let's talk about what happened after he was arrested. Apparently, he wasn't incarcerated while awaiting trial because the judge assigned this case didn't think it was necessary for Latham to be jailed before the trial. Much to the prosecutor's objections, he was released from custody and permitted to relocate to Florida to await trial. So the teen was living the life of a free man until he was summoned to court again on May 2021. Now, you would assume Latham would try and stay low and out of sight, but no, far from it. He was enjoying the same attention he got from the media. I guess there's no such thing as bad publicity, even when you have pending murder charges on your name. Latham was taking advantage of the publicity. He continuously posted his content on TikTok, revealing information about the pending case. A judge had to order him to stop pushing the boundaries of his release orders. But Latham ignored the warnings and even created a new TikTok account so he could continue making public comments on the case. he boasted about being the murderer of his neighbor to portray himself as some kind of hero who put down corrupted law enforcement officers. Prosecutors got fed up with his behavior and filed a motion to revoke his release order. But before the motion could be reviewed by a judge, Latham managed to get himself arrested again in Florida. According to Florida Highway Patrol, Latham got arrested on January 23, 2021 in Fort Myers after threatening a 17-year-old motorist with a pellet gun that resembled an AK-47 assault rifle. And guess what the reason was that led to this confrontation? Latham continued his reckless behavior behind the wheel and almost ran the minor motorist off the road, like what he did to William's son. He was charged with 2 counts of aggravated assault, but was released from jail on bond and put on electronic monitoring. The fact that they still chose to let this guy out of prison shows how biased the judicial system is. He displayed terrible behavior towards anyone and everyone. He clearly disregarded and disrespected the court order. How could he walk free without consequences? The New Jersey versus Zachary Latham trial lasted approximately a month. They had Catherine Durham and her children take the stand to testify how the incident unfolded. Medical examiners also came into court to explain the nature of William Durham's injuries and the cause of death. Catherine and her sons admitted to confronting Latham, and she also admitted that there was no recording evidence of the alleged assault on her son. Video evidence was presented in court showing William trying to attack Latham first, and that's when he countered with a knife. An interrogation video of Latham was also presented to the jurors.
You know, when you see this portion of the video where Mr. Durham, actually, he's got blood all over him, he's still upright, he's still walking, starts walking out of the garage and then decides to turn back and go back in. So I don't know. There's a lot of questions with the video for me as far as how it's going to interplay with the affirmative defense of self-defense.
On April 13th, 2023, Zachary Latham was found not guilty on all charges. After the verdict was announced, Latham was seen celebrating his victory and thanking his attorneys in court. However, the judge did remind him that this incident was nothing more than a tragedy that could have been avoided. There was no winner in this case, and hopefully everyone can learn and grow from this unwanted occurrence.
This case was an absolute tragedy. The entire endeavor. There are no winners here. Mr. Latham, you were successful in your defense, but you still have to live with the events of those days and the consequences of it.
This ruling was met with a lot of mixed reactions. Many believe that because Latham fits into the privileged category of this country, therefore the judicial system was biased in his favor. They felt that he should have gotten jail time because there are others who are imprisoned for lesser crimes. Since before the homicide took place, the Durham family had tried to take legal actions against him but were unsuccessful. He was arrested for manslaughter but wasn't detained before trial. Then he was arrested again while awaiting trial and simultaneously leaking information from the case on social media. It may be an assumption, but records show that this kid got away with a lot of things. Then there are those who believe Latham acted in self-defense and was justified in doing so. The Durhams were at fault for attacking him on his property. Some people even believe that Catherine was responsible for her husband's death because she encouraged the altercation. Also, one of the reasons why people might take Latham's side was because of William's status as a correctional officer. The relationship between law enforcement officers and the public has always been strained, and some people viewed William as a corrupt official who abused civilians, and Latham was a victim. This is still considered an ongoing debate, though there is another prominent theory. Most people shifted the blame to TikTok and social media in general. In this case, TikTok is partially to blame, but not entirely, because TikTok and other social media platforms only serve as a foundation for sensationalism or phenomenalism. Basically, the glorified image of popularity and stardom that shaped the obsession to become a celebrity through these content sharing sites. Latham was enamored with the idea of idolization through TikTok. He wanted to achieve that level of virtual success, but he was doing it through irresponsible and reckless methods. The craving for admiration isn't a bad thing, but the way you do it could affect you negatively. There have been way too many content creators and influencers who have done incredibly dangerous, vile, and foolish things in the past to gain a small amount of spotlight. Yet, the problem still exists. Until the people people of this society can understand and separate the concept of impractical success and real-world consequences, cases like this will continue to make their appearance. This case highlights the need for responsible media coverage because what you do on a virtual platform can impact your actual well-being. Finally, the most important question of them all. So where is Zachary Latham now? Well, as soon as Latham was announced not guilty, he immediately did this. It seems like he's all right with all this publicity. Quite frankly, he seems to be enjoying it, so good for him. I mean, we constantly throw around the word narcissist as a way to describe a self-absorbed person. But in this case, it seems like Latham is suffering from narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, which is a mental health condition that causes someone to have an exaggerated sense of self-importance and lack empathy. Some of the trials of this disorder are preoccupation with power, beauty, or success, entitlement, arrogance, being interpersonally explosive for their gain, and the excessive need to be admired. It is also more common in men. At the end of the day, this was still a depressing story of unfriendly neighbors. So many things could have been done to avoid this catastrophe. The Durham family lost a son, husband, and father due to a silly dispute. May their family heal from this event and continue their productive lives. After this disastrous incident, hopefully everyone will be more aware of toxic media usage and understand the consequences of their actions through both virtual and the real world. Do you think Zachary Latham's verdict was justified? Why or why not?
Albuquerque police have arrested a second suspect accused of kidnapping turned murder. Police say they've arrested 18-year-old Annabella Dukes. She is accused of luring a man through social media in February of 2020.
I watched him die right in front of my face, and it was horrific.
I got there in 5 minutes. I watched my son die right in front of my face.
You could hear the pain in the mother's voice as she recounted the moment she helplessly stood there watching life drip out of her son's body.
He went out there to go protect his brother, and he didn't even get a chance. He walked outside, and from my car and from the car that followed my car, they just opened fire. They shot my son 5 times. He didn't have a chance.
Elias Arturo, a former correctional officer, was killed in active service of love to his baby brother, who was kidnapped by a girl he had met on social media and used as bait to lure him out and eventually murder him right in front of his family. Let's look at the events leading up to this senseless act of violence. How did this nightmare begin? Well, it all started with a simple Snapchat message when Nicholas Arturo, a 20-year-old man from Albuquerque, New Mexico, met an 18-year-old Annabella Dukes on the Snapchat social app. Annabella had messaged Nicholas, and the young man was intrigued by her beautiful face and charming smile, which you could see from her pictures. They exchanged messages for a few days and seemed to hit it off. Annabella told Nicholas that she liked him and wanted to meet him in person. She suggested that they go to a park near her house where they could hang out and get to know each other better. Nicholas was already flattered by the prospect of a young, beautiful woman finding him interesting enough to want to meet him. So he instantly agreed and asked for her address. She sent him a location of where she said was her home, and she asked him to come pick her up from there. Nicholas was excited and nervous at the same time. He had never met anyone from Snapchat before, but he thought Annabella was different. She seemed genuine and sweet. He hoped that she would also like him when they would eventually meet in person. So he got ready and drove to her address, following the directions on his phone. When he arrived at her supposed home in his red Lexus car, she was already waiting for him outside, wearing her dazzling smile. She got into his car and off they went. Nicholas felt a surge of attraction as he looked at her. She was even more gorgeous in person. He drove to the park, hoping to get to know her better. But as they talked, he realized that something was off. She kept asking him strange and intrusive questions like how much money he had, where he kept his valuables, and if he owned any weapons. She also seemed to be constantly on the phone, recording or transmitting their conversation to someone on the other end, whom police later identified as her 17-year-old boyfriend, Adrian Avila. Nicholas felt uneasy and decided to end the date. He told her that he had to go home and he turned the car around. But before he could exit the park, another car blocked his way. 3 masked men jumped out of the car, armed with guns and knives. They destroyed his windows and dragged him out of the car. After roughing him up, they searched his car and took everything they could find. His wallet, his phone, his necklace, his watch, everything. Nicholas was in shock and pain. He looked around for the girl, hoping that she would help him or call for help, but she was nowhere to be seen. She had betrayed him and set him up for a robbery. She had gone to the other car with the robbers, leaving him alone while he struggled for his life. Nicholas hoped that the nightmare would end soon. He hoped that the robbers would spare his life and let him go after they took all he had. But they had other plans. They wanted more money, and they knew who to get it from. They forced Nicholas to drive to his brother Elias's house, where he lived with their 2 other siblings. When they got there, they made him call Elias on FaceTime so he could see the gun pointed at his little brother's head. They demanded that Elias bring them $1,000 and a gun in exchange for his brother's life. Elias was shocked and terrified when he saw his little brother in danger. He loved Nicholas more than anything, and he would do anything to save him. He grabbed his own gun, which he had a license for, and ran out of the house to confront the abductors. He told them to let his brother go, or he would pull the trigger. Before he could do anything, one of the robbers, later identified as Adrian, fired at him, hitting him several times. Nicholas screamed in horror as he saw his brother fall. He managed to escape from the grip of his captors and ran to Elias's side. He tried to help him by putting pressure on his wounds, but there was nothing he could do. Life was slowly dripping out of Elias. The robbers panicked and fled in different directions, leaving behind their car and their loot, and Elias's sister called 911 at around 2:20 a.m., hoping that they could come and save her big brother. The paramedics arrived and tried to resuscitate him, but it was no use. Elias was gone. Not knowing what else to do, one of their brothers immediately called their mom, who rushed to the scene as fast as she could.
My youngest son called me screaming that my son Elias had been shot. I jumped in the car immediately. I got there in 5 minutes. I watched him die right in front of my face, and it was horrific.
The family was devastated, and all they wished was that the perpetrators be caught and made to face the consequences of their actions.
I want the people who were involved, all of them, to be put in prison. I want them to stay there.
Elias Arturo had a happy and fulfilling life while he lived. He was born on November 19, 1996 in Albuquerque, New Mexico to Luis and Alicia Arturo. He grew up with 2 brothers, Jacob and Nicholas, and 2 sisters, Delilah and Elia. He was the oldest of the siblings, and he always looked out for them. He was the glue that held the family together.
He wasn't just my son, he was my best friend.
Elias had a bright personality and a big heart. He was funny and charming, and he could make anyone laugh with his jokes and stories.
And we're all just really, really close, so we joked around and played around like we were friends.
He was also courageous and loyal. He would stand up for anyone who needed his help. He was passionate about his career as a corrections officer for the Metropolitan Detention, where he worked for several years before leaving. At 24, Elias had everything going on well for him. He had landed a new job at the Postal Service, which paid well and offered more benefits, and he had moved into his own place because he was about to tie the knot and start a family with the love of his life, the woman who shared his dreams and values. But then everything changed in an instant. A tragic twist of fate that no one saw coming. Meanwhile, the responding officers arrived at the scene moments later and were met with a gruesome sight. Elias's body was lying lifeless on the ground with 3 pistols, a rifle, and bullet casings littered all over the place. Nicholas, whose car was smashed and abandoned a few blocks away, was still in shock and visibly shaken. He blamed himself for what had happened to his big brother, because had he not gone on that date, his brother would still be alive. He cursed himself, but he had to also put himself together to help the officers with information that would help catch his brother's killers. So he narrated his ordeal with the girl, from when they started chatting to when they met, to the strange questions she was asking him about his personal stuff, and how he was eventually ambushed and robbed while she looked on. He told the officers everything that happened on that day, leading to the point when his brother was gunned down. Having gathered all the facts and information they needed, the officers immediately swung into action and launched an investigation into the case. They started by tracing the Snapchat account to Annabella Dukes. She was still texting Nicholas immediately after they fled the crime scene, pretending to be scared and innocent. She said, "Are you okay? I ran. I'm still running. IDK where to go." The officers were able to obtain Annabelle's cell phone data to track her cell phone pings. Her location was pinged around Alvarado Park, then to the crime scene, and finally to Adrian's house. They also found that Adrian's phone had the same location history as his girlfriend's. Further investigation revealed to the authorities that this was not an isolated incident. Annabella, Adrian, and the others had been in this business for quite some time.
18-year-old Adrian Avila and 18-year-old Annabella Dukes. Police say Annabella met guys on social media, then set them up to be robbed and carjacked.
Their tactics were to flaunt Annabella's beauty and charm as bait to lure unsuspecting victims to an isolated area so they could ambush and rob them of their valuables. Moments before Nicholas's robbery, Annabella and her lover had exchanged a text where Annabella said, "I'm gonna run away," acting like she was afraid. The text revealed that the duo was planning another robbery a few hours before they met Nicholas. The data on Annabella's phone showed a conversation with another victim whom they had robbed and carjacked a day before meeting Nicholas. That's the same car they used to ambush and rob Nicholas. As part of the investigation, officers brought the owner of the car and confirmed that they had been set up by a girl on Snapchat and robbed by two men at Alvarado Park, the same tactics they had used on Nicholas. Meanwhile, Elias's family continued to mourn their son and brother.
We hurt every day. We hurt. We can't sleep. We can't sleep or nothing, and we just want these people caught.
Please call Crime Stoppers. These people need to get off the streets. They are dangerous, and I don't want this to happen to any other families.
Crime Stoppers even offered a reward of $2,500 to anyone with information that would lead to the arrest of Annabella and her accomplice. After being on the run for a month, Annabella and Adrian eventually turned themselves in December 2021.
Tonight, after nearly a month on the run, an 18-year-old turns herself in, now in custody in connection to the murder of a former corrections officer.
She was charged with murder, kidnapping, 2 counts of armed robbery, tampering with evidence, and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder.
Is in a lot of legal trouble. So is the guy next to her, Adrian Avila. Both are wanted for multiple crimes, including the death of Elias Otero.
She initially pleaded not guilty to the charges and claimed that she was coerced by Adrian to participate in the crime. She said that she was afraid of him and that he threatened to hurt her if she did not cooperate. However, she later took a plea deal.
One of the suspects in a robbery scheme that ended in murder took a plea deal today. Anna Dukes was in court this afternoon where she took a plea deal for her part in the death of Elias Otero. Dukes admitted using social media to lure a man to a park.
She pleaded guilty to armed robbery with firearms, enhancement, conspiracy, and 2 other charges. The murder and kidnapping charges were dropped, and as a part of the plea agreement, she will serve 5 years behind bars. Adrian Avila was also charged with murder, kidnapping, 2 counts of armed robbery, tampering with evidence, and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. He pleaded not guilty to any of the charges. At the time of making this video, nothing has been heard about the 2 other accomplices and Adrian's sentencing. Elias Otero's murder added to the body count of gun violence that rocked the city of Albuquerque between 2021 and 2022. The Albuquerque Police Department statistics show that the city recorded a total of 120 homicides in 2022, which exceeded the 110 killings that were recorded the previous year. What's more disturbing about these numbers is that most of these crimes were committed by teenagers who are repeat violent offenders, and most of the time, they are protected by the law from facing the full consequences of their actions. So they get out and commit more and more crime. To stop this crime cycle from endlessly repeating itself, Elias's mother, Alicia, joined forces with other parents who have lost loved ones in violent crimes to form the New Mexico Crusade for Justice. Their aim is to champion for more severe punishment for repeat violent juvenile offenders.
I think we need stiffer punishments for juveniles. In a lot of these cases, the murderers are under 18 years old. They're getting guns and they're committing these crimes. And once they turn 21, they're just, they're let out.
These families have come together in grief to console one another while they mourn the loss of their loved ones.
He went out there to go protect his brother and he didn't even get a chance. He walked outside and from my car and from the car that followed my car, they just opened fire. They shot my son 5 times. He didn't have a chance.
Alicia said that her son's death has been a nightmare for everyone in the family, including Elias's fiance. They remember him as a kind and loving person who spent his whole life protecting others and died doing the same thing.
I'm not ready to go through all this stuff yet, but he collected stuff like these.
Everything in every aspect has changed for us. So it's just a constant battle within ourselves every day.
This case serves as a lesson to those of us whose lives revolve around social media. We should be more careful with our dealings with people we meet online. If not for our sake, for the sake of our loved ones, because they might be the ones to get caught up in the crossfire. We would love to hear your thoughts on this case in the comments below. That is the pain of a mother who had just discovered the horror that her daughter went through at the hands of 2 vile monsters who couldn't take no for an answer. Eleni Tupaldi was a beautiful young woman who had her whole future ahead of her. But in an effort to find love, she went on a date with someone she met on Facebook. But the date would turn out to be a nightmare, as the man who she thought was nice and charming was nothing but a sick predator, who, along with friends, would brutally take Eleni's life. The details of this case will make you want to scream in anger and frustration because of how the media and some members of the public tried to blame the victim for what happened to her. But let's get right into it. Everyone who knew and loved 21-year-old Eleni Tupaldi described her as a generous, ambitious, and kind person who had a great sense of humor. She was the daughter of 2 teachers, Kula and Yanis Tupaldi, and grew up in a small city in Greece with her younger brother. From a young age, Eleni had a real passion for languages. And at just 18, she spoke Arabic, German, and English, in addition to her native Greek language. She had dreams of becoming a diplomat and traveling the world, and so she worked hard to pursue that dream. Eleni did very well in school, and after graduating from high school, she enrolled at a university in the islands of Rhodes, which was a bit far from home. Despite this being the first time she was away from her family, Eleni quickly adapted to the island's way of life. And with her infectious smile and outgoing personality, she was soon making friends and going out. Everything seemed to be working out well for Eleni, and she was really enjoying the laid-back vibe of the island. And she even considered settling there after university. But her experience there would turn into a real-life nightmare. In November 2018, Eleni received a message from a 19-year-old Albion guy named Alexander Luka. The two chatted for a while, with Alexander bragging about all the charity work that kept him busy on the island. Eleni thought he was super charming and was instantly attracted to him. And after a week of texting back and forth, the two decided to meet up in person for a date. But that would soon prove to be a terrible mistake that Eleni would come to regret. Eleni was super excited about this date. It would be her first date after a horrifying experience in 2017, where she and a friend were offered a ride by 3 men from a party. The men dropped off Eleni's friend safely at her home, but on the way to drop off Eleni, they made a detour and took her to a secluded place where they victimized her. These sickos, who were aged between 17 and 21 years, even recorded the horrid ordeal. And as if that's not enough, they started blackmailing her with it, saying that they'll post it on social media if she doesn't get with them. How messed up is that? Eleni, of course, refused, but she was so traumatized and distraught that she even cut her hair. She felt embarrassed and ashamed, and she couldn't even bring herself to tell her parents about what had happened. She did tell a friend who advised her to go to the police and file charges against the men. Now, this is where it gets really annoying and frustrating. Instead of the police creating a safe environment for the victims to come forward and report such cases without feeling judged, some law enforcement officers are known to make crude, victim-blaming statements that make the victims wish they had never reported in the first place. This situation is already uncomfortable enough for the victim, and often they're already blaming themselves for what happened to them. So what they're looking for is a safe space, and for someone to assure them that it's not their fault. But unfortunately, that's not what happened to Eleni. When she got to the police station, the officers were less than sympathetic. They refused to file the charges, telling her that it was too late since a week had already gone by. They even told her to let it go and move on. Sick. Later, Eleni and her friends would find out that the men who had attacked her were part of a large network of predators online who would go around targeting women and recording them in their most vulnerable position and then share it amongst themselves. How disgusting is that? After a year had gone by, Eleni felt that she was ready to give love a second chance. Tragically, the man she thought would be her chance of finding love would turn out to be an even worse monster. On November 27, 2018, at 10 p.m., Alexander pulled into Eleni's apartment complex in a white truck to pick her up for their date. Surveillance footage shows him pacing back and forth in front of her apartment before she eventually came out to meet him. He gave her a hug and a kiss as they made their way to the car, and that's where she got her first surprise. Alexander wasn't alone. His friend, 20-year-old Manolis Koukuras, was sitting in the passenger seat. A little background on Manolis. He was the son of a wealthy and influential family on the island that owned almost 60% of the real estate there. The family also owned many businesses and restaurants, so they had a lot of money to throw around. Manolis was used to getting his way, and despite having multiple run-ins with the law, his family would always bail him out. So he was basically a rich, spoiled brat. It turned out that the truck that Alexander came to pick up Eleni with actually belonged to Manolis' dad. Alexander had not mentioned that he was bringing a friend on their first date, so Eleni was a bit hesitant. But Manolis introduced himself, and not wanting to appear rude, Eleni got into the truck with the two men. And then the second surprise came. Initially, the plan was to go to a local kebab restaurant for their date, but now Alexander announced that Manolis' family had a beautiful summer house near the restaurant, and it would be more fun to go there instead of sitting at a fast food joint. Eleni didn't want to, but she felt trapped in that situation and thought that she had no choice but to go along with it. But she texted one of her friends saying, "Call me in an hour." That way she could have the excuse to leave without seeming rude. However, when the friend called her an hour later, the phone went unanswered. That was really weird, but the friend thought that maybe Eleni had changed her mind, or maybe she was having too much fun and had misplaced her phone. She never imagined that Eleni would be fighting for her life at that very moment. The next morning was November 28, 2018. Two fishermen who were just going about their business when they noticed something floating near a rocky area of the sea. And when they went closer to investigate, they were horrified to discover that it was a human body. Local authorities were immediately called to the scene, and they learned that the body belonged to a young woman. However, due to the state of her injuries, she could not be easily identified. The only distinguishing feature that could be used to identify her was a rose tattoo on her leg. Authorities started going around to all the little tattoo parlors on the island, hoping that someone would recognize it. And before long, someone did. And the poor young woman was identified as 21-year-old Eleni Tupaldis. Imagine receiving a call about your loved one having been brutally murdered. Eleni's family was inconsolable. They knew that she was safe at the university and never had a single moment's thought that she could be lying on the beach somewhere, dead. Who would do that to their daughter? And why? What would be their motive to hurt someone so kind and loving? The family wanted answers, and so did the police. An investigation to find the monsters behind the brutal crime was underway. An autopsy showed that Eleni had not just been killed, but she had been savagely victimized before being thrown into the water to die. She had marks and wounds all over, including knife jabs and marks around her neck. Her legs had also been tied together, indicating that whoever attacked her didn't want her to survive. Investigators were able to obtain surveillance footage outside Eleni's home, and before long, they had their suspects in custody. As you'd expect, Manolis denied any involvement in Eleni's murder, but his friend Alexander was quick to confess. But he tried to minimize his participation in the murder, blaming his friend Manolis for most of what happened. He claimed that after getting into the summer house that night, he and Manolis started making advances on Eleni, asking her to get intimate with both of them, but bluntly refused. According to Alexander, Manolis could not take the rejection, and he became violent towards Eleni, attacking her with their fists and an electric iron. Scared and confused, Eleni threatened to go to the police, hoping that the men would get scared and leave her alone. But Manolis took this as provocation and decided to get rid of her. Alexander claimed that he tried to stop his friend, but Manolis was set on hurting the young woman. But Eleni did not go down easy. She bravely fought off her attackers and attempted to escape, but she was sadly overpowered. While semi-conscious, the two sickos drove her to the beach and victimized her before tying her legs and throwing her into the ocean just because she said no. Heartbreakingly, Eleni was still alive when she went overboard, and she reportedly begged them to take her to the hospital, promising that she wouldn't say anything to anyone if they let her live. But these two heartless monsters were determined to get rid of her. Her last words were, reportedly, "My dad will come after you both." Investigators were shocked by Alexander's calmness as he described the horrific and callous way they treated Eleni. One officer would say it was as if he was telling a simple story. Alexander would also tell investigators the location where they disposed of Eleni's clothes and belongings, along with other evidence. Although the two had tried to clean up the crime scene, investigators would still find DNA evidence in the entire house and in the Manolis' father's truck. With his mom and lawyer present, Manoli would also tell his version of the story, blaming Alexander for everything that happened. Both men were arrested and charged with the murder of Eleni. The news of Eleni's gruesome murder shook the entire nation of Greece, with many struggling to understand how two young men could be capable of doing something so heinous and evil. But there was a big difference in how the media portrayed the two suspects. Alexander, being an Albanian immigrant with no money, was painted as the villain in the entire case, while Manoli was the helpless, poor rich kid from a good family who watched helplessly as Eleni was being attacked. And social media was even more insane. Some people were saying horrible things about Eleni, blaming her for what happened to her, and saying that she kinda deserved it. They portrayed her as an unstable and easy girl and used her first horrifying experience to say that she should have known better. What kind of sick reasoning is that? Needless to say, this was really devastating for her family, who did not even know about her ordeal in 2017. Meanwhile, the two suspects showed zero remorse for their actions and acted like what they did was not a big deal. They were seen laughing and flipping off the cameras, behaving like this was all a big joke to them. It was later revealed that Alexander had a long history of crimes against women, including one where he and another man victimized a 19-year-old handicapped girl just 4 days after killing Eleni. It was also discovered that one of the three men who had attacked Eleni in 2017 was actually a friend of Alexandra. As for Manolis, he also had several cases of attacking young girls and women, and was even expelled from several schools due to his violent behavior. However, his parents defended him, using their money and resources to get him out of paying for his mistakes. Now, the trial started on January 13th, 2020, and Manoli's parents hired the best defense lawyers to get their son acquitted of the crime. And things would get really insane and wild from here. The defense was ready to do anything to defend their client, to the point of even asking that no women be part of the jury, as they couldn't be impartial in this type of case, according to them. The prosecutor, who was a woman, also faced numerous pressure and threats. One night, she was even attacked while going home, but she didn't let any of that intimidate her and stop her from seeking justice for Eleni. The defense tried to put all of the blame on Alexander, portraying him as the predator who had corrupted the son of a well-meaning and influential family. They painted Manolis as a naive victim who didn't know any better and was easily influenced. Manolis' parents had even gone as far as paying a doctor to prescribe antidepressants to Manolis to make him seem more vulnerable. But during the trial, two women came in and testified that Alexander and Manolis had victimized them as well. The prosecutor gave a powerful speech about gender-based violence, in which she talked about the culture of victim blaming and condemned everyone who had been defaming the victim. She said that even if Eleni had had a consensual relationship with Alexander in the past, it was wrong to force her that night against her consent. In her speech, she addressed not just the two criminals, but their parents and society, who created such monsters by enabling their behaviors all these years. The trial proceedings went on for over 2 years, but finally, the two were found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. But while this might sound like a win, in Greece, life in prison could mean 10 years. Fortunately, they were also given a further 15 years of the assault charges. This means that they'll have to stay in prison for 25 years before they're eligible for parole. A leaked video has shown the two predators getting a taste of their own medicine in prison. If you ask me, that's poetic justice. What do you think about this case? Let me know in the comment section, and don't leave without giving this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more.